latest Glitche Productions pilot episode has released, and hey, I may be a little bit biased, but I absolutely love it. As someone who particularly likes to watch animation and also creators on YouTube and Twitch, this project is just the absolute perfect Venn diagram of the kind of thing I would watch. Other than the fact that it's 2D. Gonna be very curious to see how the analytics do on this one. Nonetheless, as someone who has been a big fan of all things Egoraptor and RubberRoss back in the day, somewhat even further back in the day, but I usually saw that a few years later, and in the modern day, I recreationally enjoy watching the likes of Schlatt, Armorly, and obviously general superpowers in the voice acting industry. This just seems like exactly the kind of project blended down for someone like me who loves all sorts of video game references in their media, and being done on the backs of the rise of indie animation and Glitche Productions of all people actually being the ones to greenlight this. It's just, in so many ways, the perfect blend of what I would hope to see succeed more in the industry. And I'm not surprised it's happening the way that it is. Purportedly, this is a show that has been shopped around by main creator Ross for decades now, and to be honest, I can kind of see why it's been such a hurdle this entire time. There are many multiple factors in there beyond just the fact that they're only internet creators. But looking at the actual final best result of this show so far, yeah, I can see how it's hard to pitch to a classic suit exec. But as someone who has spent probably a shameful amount of hours watching those old school Gartic phone videos with Ross and his friends, I am absolutely not surprised to see the incredible quality that has come out of this. I'm going to try my best to hold back on telling you each and every reference that I saw as I went along. It's exactly the kind of thing that I would monologue about. Whilst at the same time, it does have the potential to have an unfortunate parallel that's interesting to see how they worked around, with Illumination's latest movie being the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which similarly was full of all sorts of gaming references, but was very much point and recognize and not real substance. That, I think, is the biggest red flag that Gameoverse could fall into, since it's so clearly, so heavily video game inspired, and there are lots of point and recognize beats in this pilot, but it is a different execution, with it naturally being a successful spin of a love letter to all things gaming, rather than simply point and look, it's the logo like it's Wreck-It Ralph 2. This project in general feels very Wreck-It Ralph 1, and that's a damn good parallel to have. So the general plot behind Gameoverse is that when the hero inevitably wins their game, their world is destroyed and they enter the Gameoverse. So our main characters Kit and Caboodle here, and also Gobbles, have to go out of their way to prevent games from being won in order to prevent their worlds being destroyed. It's an interesting spin that the heroes have to work with the villains, and the villains have to work with the heroes. All the while, the kind of character archetypes you see are exactly the kind of thing I adore. I love the villain duo, the yes man and the no woman. They are Jesse and James and Team Rocket bundled up into a perfect little ball. All the while feeling like one giant Paper Mario reference, and generally just rolling out exactly like you would come to expect. And whilst the plot we've had so far has been pretty simply, look at the trailer and see how a world was destroyed, then look at the prologue and see how the world was destroyed for the protagonist, and then watch how a world is destroyed slowly over about half an hour, it's very clear that there's so much more going on beneath the surface, as the full mechanics of this world are fully understood, and we're only seeing the surface. It is only a pilot, and also this thing has been around since like 2009, which you can legitimately watch the original series for back when RubberRoss was Rubber Ninja to see a little bit of how long this idea has been running. All the while the story has been relatively simple so far, people have already started extrapolating how these mechanics work. Like, what do you do when a sequel game exists? Does it clone everybody and then you have to interact with them? Apparently we are definitely going to see that. But then beyond the simplistic understanding of the storyline, the actual execution is fantastic on so many fronts. The pilot opens with an action scene to be just great retention time to hook you, but the actual animation behind it is absolutely stellar. And as someone who has watched so many small VFX animations done in Gartic Phone, I can really come to see how this is kind of the final form of that, actually put together into a larger full frontal project. It's incredible stuff. Details are apparently hidden in impact frames, including the signature and ethos of Monty Ohm, who this pilot is dedicated to, which is just immaculate. And when it comes to the jokes, I adore the delivery practically every time. Whether it be Schlatt's deadpan delivery of his own voice, which I think actually works really well and nicely. Love that stuff.
The sea scourge goes. That's me.
Noted.
Or right down to very specific little delivery bits that just scratch my brain in a certain way that I really enjoy. I think across the board, even the voice acting blends perfectly well together. The closest thing I had to a criticism on the voice acting is I feel like Arin Hanson as Gobbles didn't work at first when he was more stupid, but then as he develops, he's a learnosaurus that learns over time. You can tell they're going to go crazy on that mechanic later on. I felt like he melded into that character after a little bit of getting used to it. Whilst also him also playing the dolphin and also the spiky bull and probably several other voices, that's probably the biggest thing that takes me out of the immersion. And that's probably because I've heard his voice so much over the years. It's an unfortunate suffering from success kind of deal. I recognize him so much that I recognize him, and less so his character. Hey there! Thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come subscribe if you haven't already for more animation reviews. Not gonna lie, judging on how well this review does will decide if I keep posting about Gameoverse. But worst case scenario, I'll do a big reaction to the whole series by the time it ends, because I'm kind of cooking up a couple of other Glitch production stuff in the background. You'll see. So come subscribe, and now to the second half of this video. On the soundtrack front, I think they do an incredible job. You've got Grant Kirkhope involved, who previously did the composing for Banjo-Kazooie, which makes sense, because a Banjo-Kazooie-informed song just outright plays their motif in the middle of this show. And though I was particularly hooked on the pilot episode of Glitch Productions' previous show, The Amazing Digital Circus, I think that was because it was a lot more entrenched in theories and mystery work. That this show still has some theory crafting you can extrapolate to it, but I think that's the only thing that really makes me compare the two, just in looking at, as a pilot, how it keeps my retention going. Clearly though, this has built its own fandom already, and I'm 100% on board for both the people behind it and the immaculate execution that's coming through. There are a million video game references in here that I'm sure I'm gonna gush about in future episodes if I do continue reviewing or doing breakdowns of this in the future. Mostly the whole thing's baked in a lot of Mega Man-isms, which makes sense based on the history of the creators. But then you can also see all sorts of minor stuff like Crash Bandicoot, Ratchet and Clank. I feel like Crab Girl is a Pikmin reference, considering she looks exactly like a Bulborb. Whilst also they're allowed to go a little bit more intensive with the violence based on some of the mechanics, since it's all virtual or in some places just outright mechanical, that several characters get sliced in half. And it's great to see that kind of grit coming out of what is otherwise kind of what feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, but not at all in a bad way. There are characters that are only hinted at that we've got to work out the mystery of where they go to. I love the theory that actually the Sephiroth Alucard vampire that comes in for Kit when her world destroys is actually the villain of an original world, and our main villain of the show was once the hero of his game, but now has built himself up to be the villain, since the roles are reversed. There's a million guesses on what exactly the connection with Lulu is in a little photograph we see. I can't help but notice that the space submersible is controlled with a controller. I don't know if that's a video game reference or a billionaire reference, but I can't unsee it. There is a whole big thing about static in this world that kind of just appears and then solves itself in the middle of this pilot that I'm sure is going to do the main heavy lifting of mechanics later on. But also you can generally tell that, especially with the low tier goons that are in this show so far, the Team Rocket duo, you can just tell they're going to flip sides at some point, and then it's your proper cartoony goodness. You know, when there's going to be some bigger bad that they're all dealing with. That's the good stuff that you can really sink your teeth into, that I can just tell this show is going to lean on at some point. Though also in general, I just bloody love Fold. I love the voice that Ross actually applies to that character. It's exactly my kind of archetype. And he also does it as well with Crabbington. I don't know, I just love that vibe a lot. Easily, that's my favorite guy. And yes, he was involved in Kit's end of the world, considering he's in all of their prologue, just only as a paper. Love that. And he's the only one that knows them beforehand. I've watched this a couple of times. I've seen the theories. Beyond that, though, I think this is a solid Glitch pilot. A classic in many ways that hooks directly into exactly the kind of thing I would see. And though it doesn't hook as strongly as one of the craziest pilots of this decade, I mean, the numbers of that thing you're never going to overthrow. Probably not for at least a decade, if ever. But I still absolutely absolutely adore this show and what it stands for. After a consistent layout of YouTubers and creators not getting into any kind of film industry unless you directly fund and do it yourself this year, or get involved in the animation front and then get on with doing it yourself this year, it's nice to see that these guys are now on that upward trajectory and getting into the mainstream as the industry's finally starting to catch up on actually doing something original. These are like the only guys doing something original. God, I hate the industry, and I feel less bad that I call 75% of films these days terrible. It is a downward trajectory, and it is because of the very same suits that likely rejected incredible shows like this. A love letter to all things gaming with a Saturday morning cartoon vibe, likely a world of the week kind of thing, that'll hopefully lean into a mix of alliances down the line to some big bad, as the mechanics of this Gameoverse will surely go crazy in all sorts of ways, and you just know you're in for a damn good time. A modern classic inspired by the warm nostalgia of games and cartoons past. The question is, who's the twist villain? I've heard Caboodle, I've heard Gobbles, I've heard Crab Girl. Oh hey, maybe they really do Wreck-It Ralph it, and it's gonna be some arcade owner. Whatever the case, what a joy this has been as a little additive to the animation industry. I'll certainly be keeping up with this show because it's exactly my kind of thing, but for now at least, I'll end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell us your thoughts on all things Gameoverse. I keep wanting to say Gameoververse, but it merges, but my brain does not compute. There you go, a whole second criticism for you. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more, but otherwise, I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!